Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Hosick, and I'm the Adult Programming Librarian at the East Brunswick Public Library. Thank you for joining us for our now all virtual panel of the Many Faces of Murder. It's a murder mystery author panel with the Sisters in Crime Central Jersey chapter. And to get us started off on this panel and learning more about their authors and their genres and the writing process is Eileen Watkins, their publicity officer. So take it away, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in for our panel. We're going to talk about the Many Faces of Mystery, which is going to have a kind of a loose interpretation. We've got four authors who are members of Sisters in Crime Central Jersey, and they all write very different, including myself, and they all write very different subgenres of mystery, some of which are breaking new ground. First, I should probably explain to anyone who doesn't know that the national group Sisters in Crime is our parent group, was founded in 1986 by 26 women crime writers who felt that in terms of reviews, royalties, and awards, male writers were receiving preference over equally talented women. Sarah Paretsky, for example, was one of the people involved in this. Today, Sisters in Crime has more than 60 chapters in the U.S. and more than 4,500 members. The group welcomes members of all genders, and mystery readers as well as writers. But the goal remains the support of women mystery and thriller writers. So there's a lot of chapters and 60 chapters. And the Central Jersey group began in 1998 and to date has 40 members. It began in the Jamesburg area, and now these days when it meets in person, it meets at the Jamesburg Senior Center. And Sisters in Crime National, I ought to mention, because these are two issues that might have special importance to the area. It offers a program, We Love Libraries, an outreach program that will provide a participating library with a $1,000 grant. Details can be found at www.sistersincrime.org/page/We Love Libraries. If you go on Sisters in Crime and look under We Love Libraries, I'm sure you'll be able to find that information. And Sisters in Crime National Archives are located at Douglas College of Rutgers University as part of the Special Collection and University Archives in the Alexander Library. So even though the group is national, it does have some local roots. Now we are going to be talking about several, at least 4 and more subgenres of mystery, some of which you may not have heard of before, but they're people that are breaking new ground every day. I'm going to start off because my subgenre is really the most conventional and the most familiar to most people. I write cozy mysteries, and the definition of cozy mysteries, if it was a live audience, I would ask people if they've heard of it and what they think it means. But since we don't have a live audience, it is mysteries that have a murder involved but aren't too shocking. In other words, you don't have graphic violence, you don't have graphic sexual situations, and you don't have a lot of triggering events like the death of a child or even the abuse of an animal or something like that. Usually they take place in a small town, and there's always an amateur sleuth. The sleuth is not a private eye, is not in law enforcement in any way. Basically, when people say, well, how does that work? I say, murder, she wrote. It's basically, in modern times, the murder, she wrote model is typical. Jessica Fletcher started out as an author who was interested in mysteries. She never became a private eye. She never, became a cop or anything like that. But she was always hovering on the fringes, and she was always the person. She was very smart. And she was always the person who got people to confide in her. And that basically is the model of a cozy mystery main character. These days, they usually are involved in some kind of small business of their own, which conveniently lets them, pop out and investigate things without necessarily having a boss stand over them saying, where are you going now? What do you stop getting involved in this stuff? They usually end up having some kind of either negative or positive relationship with the local police. It often starts out negative, and after they've proven themselves a little bit, it becomes more positive. My particular books, the main series that I've had along this line is the Cat Groomer Mysteries, in which a woman who has a cat grooming and boarding business in a small New Jersey town ends up solving crimes connected with her customers. There have been mysteries done with animals before, and usually they were a bit different from this. Usually the animals are, kind of smarter than the people, solve the crimes for them, have psychic links with the people in some way. People read their thoughts and vice versa. I was actually asked it was one of three topics that was suggested by my publisher, and the way they suggested it, I had a feeling that they wanted me to write psychic animals or something along that line. And I said to my agent, I don't want to do that. I'm a very, very big animal lover, but I respect them as animals. I want them to behave as animals. And I said, I'm going to have my sleuth get involved in the crimes because she starts out doing her job, looking out for the animals, and gets involved in the craziness that's going on with the people. And that was basically the approach I took to it. So it's a little bit different from something that had been done before, but it does basically follow the model of the amateur sleuth. And I think I will, since we're going to keep these a little bit short, I'm going to pass along to Roberta, and then anybody who has questions, I will be happy to flesh out either the cozy genre or what I in particular do. Roberta?
Okay, I'm Roberta Rogow, and I like to say that I write mysteries set in weird and wonderful places and times. I write historical mysteries, and I write mysteries that sort of twist the history so that it's alternate. And I also write mysteries that are set in a science fictional place, a city somewhere across the galaxy, but settled by humans. I'm not good on aliens. The trick there is that the mystery is very often quite traditional because I write human beings, although there are people who will include some non-human creatures or persons with non-human characteristics. But I have the feeling that no matter where us humans go, whether in the past or the future, we're going to bring ourselves with us and all of our problems and our traumas and our angst. And if I may use some Yiddish, some mishigas, craziness. For instance, my current series is set, as I said, in this city up there somewhere. It was settled by humans. It's across the galaxy. But it's a private eye story. And my main character is a private eye. And I follow the tropes, the expectations of a private eye. She has a client. She's doing this because she's paid to do it. It's not like an amateur sleuth who gets involved because he or she, very often she, is somehow involved with the people. But Polidrock, who is my private eye, is paid to investigate. She just happens to live in a city that was founded by human beings who landed there 400 years before, none of which gets into the story. The difference between my stuff and somebody who is doing a story set in the here and now, contemporary, is the research. I have to do a lot more of it. I have to do what's known as world building. If I'm doing a story that is set in historical times or a variation of a historical time, I have to know all about that period and how people lived there. And then I have to describe it so that the readers can get into the story. It's what I call a thumping lie. If I'm going to tell a thumping lie, I have to get every single detail right, especially historical, because there's always somebody out there who knows more about the period than you do and is going to tell you about it, usually after the book is published.
So true.
Like I said, my current thing, I got involved in a very tortuous way, which I'm not going to go into now. But I do have to get all of this right. I have a notebook that I put all of my notes in, and I check on certain scientific principles of the planet to make sure that, yes, this could happen. When I wrote my book, Murders in Manatas, which is set in a Manhattan island that was settled by Spanish Moors. I researched everything I could find about New Amsterdam. I researched the inhabitants. I researched what the atmosphere was like, what the plants and animals were there, what was there, what wasn't, what was brought in. The mystery itself, that is fairly traditional, because there's a victim, there's a plot, there's somebody who done it, and the detective, whether it is Halvar the hireling or Pola Drach, is going to find out. And that's what satisfies the reader, that the bad guy is going to get it and justice will prevail.
Delia, do you want to talk about some of yours now and
Sure,
how you're
thank you.
tweaking your genre?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Delia Pitts, and I'm really pleased to be on this panel. It's a great group of writers and of sisters in crime. I write contemporary, private eye mysteries that feature primarily people of color. My current series features a private eye who is based in New York City, in Harlem. But I wanted to talk a little bit first about the genre itself and what distinguishes it from other subgenres of mystery or crime. I think that all of us have read some private investigator mysteries. I think most of us are familiar with the first, or as he would think of himself, the original consulting detective, that would be Sherlock Holmes. And he really sets the model for a private investigator. But I think we also all are aware of other important contributors to this subgenre of crime. Dashiell Hammett's books about Sam Spade, which are set, again, all of these books were written in contemporary. Now we read Sherlock Holmes and we think, oh, this is wonderful historical mystery. But no, Conan Doyle was writing about the times in which he lived, or thereabouts, a decade or two, perhaps in the past, but essentially his own time. Same is true of Agatha Christie. We read Hercule Poirot stories and we think, oh, this is such quaint and wonderful historical mysteries. But Agatha Christie was writing contemporary novels about a private investigator, Hercule Poirot, with all of his various little gray cells. He's quite distinct from her not professional investigator, Miss Marple, who is, I think we could say, was the primogenitor of informal or perhaps cozy, but certainly, cozy mysteries. Hercule Poirot is a professional, as are private investigators in general. I think that's the distinguishing feature. Philip Marlowe is the other sort of key father figure, if you will, although they're lesser people. Philo Vance, Nick and Nora Charles, or Nick in a case. Nora's the amateur, Nick is the professional in that duo. But all of these share, I think, certain key traits. And I like to think of them as the job, the mission, and the code. And I think having those three elements is what makes us recognize and enjoy private eye mysteries. Private investigators, as Roberta and Eileen have both mentioned already, private investigators are professionals. They're not assigned to do this. They're not going on their case, the case that concerns us in the story that we've picked up, because their aunt was strangely murdered, or their girlfriend was accused of a murder, and everybody knows she couldn't have done it, so therefore I must prove her innocence, and hopefully use my skills as a bookshop keeper or a bartender or a knitter to prove my girlfriend's innocence. That's not what a private investigator mystery, how a private investigator mystery begins. It begins with the job. A person is hired by concerned parties to solve a puzzle. The puzzle could be big, it could be small, it could be find my missing sister, it could be my husband has run away and I want him back, it could be my business partner has disappeared with the funds and I need the money to save my business. Anything can get the private eye into the case. It's typically the structure of the story that's not actually what the real case is. That's simply what draws the investigator into the case, but it is a job. The investigator is looking for money. He or she has to make a living. And I think that's an important distinction. But the private investigator is private. The private investigator does not, therefore, answer to government authorities. The private investigator is the opposite of a police officer. The private investigator typically does not have a bureaucracy enveloping their work situation. I tweak that in my own stories a little bit by placing my private investigator in a small firm. He is the lowest person on the totem pole in his security agency. But classically, most private eyes are lone wolves. They operate on their own. They choose their cases based on their need for money and their need for intellectual engagement. So the puzzle is very important to the investigator, but the job is also important to the investigation. I mentioned mission. Often the mission is an overarching concept that we don't learn about at the beginning as we first meet a private investigator. But after we have known her for a while, we begin through the course of the story to understand what are the driving forces that compel the investigator to keep going. And that's not money, typically. Classically, the mission is something larger. There's often a sort of fundamental wound that drives the private investigator, something that is unresolved from his past, something that he wants to do. Often it's a strong desire to help. She wants to help her community, her the world. She wants to set things right, as Roberta was mentioning, but she recognizes that she doesn't live in a right world, and but she has the mission which envelops and defines how she operates. She has a mission such as what I've described. Then the third element that I've mentioned is a code. The code is often something that comes really toward the end, toward the climax of a private investigator's story, because the code says where the line is drawn, where the investigator will choose among a number of usually bad options, and how that investigator chooses is based upon the code. And that's how we as the readers discover what is the code that guides and forms the investigator's work and the investigator's life goals. And the code may be something that I must stand up for my partner, as the famous speech at the end of the Maltese Falcon, in which we learn finally, after all that Sam Spade has gone through, we learn that he does draw the line, that he does have certain things that he will not compromise on, that he will send over to prison or to hanging the woman that he perhaps loves, but he'll do it because he has a code that he personally cannot violate. It's not a law. There's nothing to do with legislation. There's nothing to do with an outside force or an outside boss or a religion that dictates his code. It's a code that's internal to him. And so I invite everybody who reads Private Eye stories to think about the job, think about the mission, and think about the code that guides the private investigator, and then how that distinguishes Private Eye stories from the other subgenres, police procedurals, where the motivations are quite different. The cases could be the same. That could be a murder. As Roberta said, somebody's killed. Somebody wants to find out who killed that person. But the motivations and the methods are shaped by the elements that I've just mentioned. I'll stop there. Robyn.
Thank you, Delia. Thank you, everyone. My name is Robyn Gigl. What an honor to be with these three wonderful authors to talk to you all tonight. And thank you all for listening in. I am, in addition to being an author, I am an attorney. I've practiced law for 45 years. And so what I write, totally different from everyone else here, is I write legal thrillers. And so I know people, when they think of legal thrillers, might think of Law and Order. That's kind of a hybrid between a police procedural and a legal thriller. Some people think of John Grisham right away in terms of what he's written. But again, his books tend to be very conspiratorial. And, you know, if you read the Pelican Brief, it's not a courtroom drama. It involves the law and it involves legal situations, but it's not really a courtroom drama. And so what I have done in terms of my series, it's the Erin McCabe series. There's 3 books. First one came out in 2021, By Way of Sorrow. Second one, Survivor's Guilt, in 2022. And the most recent one came out 2 weeks ago, Remain Silent. And they all involve Erin McCabe and her law partner, Dwayne Swisher. And they are more case specific. So Erin and her partner take on a particular case in each book, and then the story progresses in terms of them defending a particular client. And is the client guilty? If they believe that the client's not guilty, how are they going to get them off? So mine are very courtroom drama based. I use my experience as an attorney. As I said, I've practiced law for 45 years and I've done nothing but litigation, including a lot of criminal defense litigation. So I use that experience as my base in terms of knowing the ins and outs of New Jersey law and New Jersey courtrooms. And I give people a behind the scenes look at what goes on when lawyers go back into chambers with the judge and they talk about cases and things like that. And I also have a little subgenre within the legal thriller genre, in that I am a transgender woman, and my main character, Erin McCabe, also happens to be a transgender woman. So in addition to telling legal thrillers, I use my books as a vehicle to talk about other issues that are important to me. And I think a lot of authors do that. No matter what kind of genre you're writing in, you explore things that are important to you. And in my case, those are, some of the issues impacting the transgender community are important to me. But as an author, you can never lose sight of the fact that someone is picking up your book because, whether it's historical fiction or a private detective story or a cozy, they're picking up your book because they like that genre. And you have to give them what they want. In my case, I have to give them a legal thriller, and I can't preach to them. So I call it my Mary Poppins approach to writing, which is you give people what they want, that spoonful of sugar, which is the legal thriller, and then maybe a little bit of medicine, which is to talk about some of the other issues that are important to me in terms of not only the law, because I not only talk about transgender issues, but there are other issues that are very important to me in terms of sometimes the justice system is stacked against people because of their race or because of their economic situation or because they're up against rich and powerful people. So those are things that I think are important to bring to the genre as well, to show what the legal system is like. Because sometimes when you watch something like Law and Order, or you watch, if you're old enough to remember Perry Mason, where, it was always, at the end, he broke the witness down and they confessed on the stand, which never happens in real life. But if you see those things, you get an impression that the system always works. And it doesn't. In real life, it doesn't. And sometimes it's stacked against people, and sometimes it's the lawyer's job to help to level the playing field. So that's what I've tried to do in my series, is to give people insights into what it's like to be a lawyer, what it's like behind the scenes, and then give them that courtroom drama that people like, in terms of cross-examining a witness or plotting strategy, in terms of how you're going to deal with some evidence that is going to come in, and how are we going to handle this. And of course, unlike Eileen's cozies, in my books, I obviously have some anger issues that I'm working through, because a lot of people die in my books. So they don't fall within the cozy genre. And I deal with some gritty subjects. Survivor's Guilt deals with issues of human trafficking and child abuse, not in an explicit way. I avoid being explicit about those things, but that is in the background of the story, and it's integral to whether or not the client is guilty or innocent. So again, we all do different things. I came to this late in life. I was in my 60s when my first book was published. And so I followed the old bromide, write what you know. And as somebody who's practiced law for a long time, it was something that I knew and wanted to share with people.
Well, Robyn, I think you suggest something that's very interesting, that no matter what genre or subgenre you're writing in, first of all, you're writing a mystery, but there are ways of bringing relatively important issues. In some cases, the mysteries are very serious inherently. You're dealing with a legal situation, or a PI is tracking down somebody who's committed a terrible crime or something like that. But I think there's always room to put something a little more serious in there. And it occurs to me that one of the things that I tried to do, I was kind of asked to write a very light sort of thing. And I realized that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go completely light, although it certainly is not as heavy as some of the stuff that you and Delia handle. But I have purposely dealt with my first book, which was not too terribly heavy, I dealt with the question of what happens to someone's pets if they die, unexpectedly. And in the case, this guy is murdered, and no one in his family, wants his cat. And my character gets involved because she really feels kind of bad about this. Not only did she like this guy, he was an important client of hers, but she's got this beautiful purebred Persian cat that nobody wants. And suddenly she's trying to find a home for it. In the second book, I deal with breeding. I wouldn't, well, I guess you would call them hybrid cats, but hybrid wild and tame cats, which is a really shady underground business. And my character gets involved in investigating that because a certain kind of cat ends up in her shop. The third one, I deal with the business of feral cats, because there's an upscale condo community that's been invaded by feral cats. And naturally, it's built on the fringes of a wood, so nobody should be surprised that there are feral cats coming back and forth. But there's a controversy over, how to handle this humanely, and it gets so controversial that somebody gets murdered, and various things like that. I've tried to deal with in dealing with the animal subjects. I've tried to deal with them in a serious way. Hoarding, for example, and things like that. So I think even when you're trying to write, a light, entertaining mystery, it has more substance to it if you get some kind of real life issue in there. And Roberta, I know that you kind of do yours, symbolically too. But Delia, were you going to say something?
I was going to pick up on your cat theme and say that in my series, actually, that's the first case that my private eye tackles. And it is important. He finds a missing cat. And at first he thinks this is ridiculous. Why would this security company, this detective company, be taking on the case of someone's missing cat? But as he learns through the investigation that he has to undertake to find the cat, he finds out that his mission and the mission of his security company, his detective agency, is in fact to fill in those gaps in law enforcement that are not covered by the police, cases that fall below the radar of the police. Mm-hmm. His is a small neighborhood firm, and too many things happen to people, especially in neglected or overlooked communities, such as some of the neighborhoods of minority populations. The police are not concerned. They don't take it up. They can't take it up. People are embarrassed. People are scared to apply to the police for redress of tensions, threats, problems. And this agency, these private detectives, step in to fill that gap. And that's the goal. That's the mission that they have to address the very serious problem of underserved populations. Obviously, I take his a little further, and it becomes there, but murder mysteries and things like that occur. But that's how they get in, because there are many cases. Missing persons is a clear example. The police won't tackle the missing person if a report of a missing person when at the beginning, if it starts out that the person is over 18, because an adult has the right to go where she or he wants to go. And there is often, the police advise, a waiting period of 48, 36, however many hours before that case can be filed. Now that's fine from the police point of view, but a parent whose 19-year-old is disappeared is not going to wait 48 hours. This is where my detective steps in. So I was just thinking, you mentioned the cats, brought that up to me.
Yeah. And that's also the kind of situation where the amateur sleuth gets involved. Also. Because the police aren't going to act, Yeah.
And in my case, I just realized that my first series, which I wrote 20 years ago, this was a straight historical, although I had two people in it who actually lived. who never actually met, as far as we know, because both of them have been very extensively researched. One was the Reverend Mr. Charles Ludwig Dodson, better known as Lewis Carroll, and the other one was Arthur Conan Doyle. And I have the two of them literally bumping into each other in Brighton, where a young girl has been kidnapped. So you get into the issue of child pornography. But I'm doing it in a historical context, and it is based on an actual historical fact that in 1876, a bill was presented to Parliament, and it was rammed through at the absolute last minute, and it had to do with child pornography and child prostitution, which was a very serious, and still is, but was actually being blocked by some rather important people who felt that their rights to access to 12-year-old girls were being impinged upon, and they were lords, and why not? I have a labor riot in one of the books, which deals with a very real event. It took place in London in 1877. So I will incorporate into my historical novels things that actually happened that do resonate today. So you can write a historical novel using the actual history, the actual people who lived in a particular place at a particular time. But these are things that even 100, 150 years later, we're still dealing with. And the same thing, if you're writing about the future, it is, what if this situation continues? One of the classic novels, you might say the one that kicked off the science fiction / mystery genre, was Isaac Asimov's Caves of Steel, in which a policeman is paired with a robot in a society that hates, fears, distrusts robots. And this is something that now has some very, very real resonances. He wrote it in 1952, and you can still read it, and it still works today.
Robyn, you've probably based some things on the real cases, haven't you, Robyn?
I try to avoid real cases. So, for example, there are things that I will take from, what's going on in the world, but I never use a real case. The closest that I've come was in terms of some of the characters in Survivor's Guilt, because I was influenced by the Jeffrey Epstein case. Not the Jeffrey Epstein case where he was arrested and ultimately committed suicide or whatever happened, but the Jeffrey Epstein case of 2006, where he was investigated in Florida and for molesting dozens of young girls, and received the slap on the wrist. And so for me, that was an event that just triggered me in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to have a character, a Jeffrey Epstein-like character. And so in that sense, I'm influenced, but I don't take any particular cases and use them. Just like I don't take any real life characters other than like kind of drawing on the Jeffrey Epstein. I don't use real characters. I always make sure, because my stories are all based in New Jersey, and I don't make up counties. So they actually occur, one in Ocean County, one in Union County, and the other one, the most recent one in Cape May and Middlesex counties. And so I always have to be careful because I know a lot of lawyers and judges, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking about them. So first of all, I set the story by way of sorrow. The first book is set in 2006, 2007, Survivor's Guild 2008, 2009, and then Remain Silent in 2010. So I have some time, but I have to be careful that, when I refer to politicians or I refer to judges, that nobody is saying, oh, is that really so-and-so? Is that Senator so? Is that Judge so-and-so? And it was funny because when By Way of Sorrow came out, so many people came up to me because there's a state senator involved. It's his son who was murdered. He's involved in trying to make sure the case comes out the way he wants it to come out. And so many people said to me, is that Senator so-and-so? And I said, absolutely not. No. So I have to be careful
Absolutely not.
being too close to reality. I have to make sure that I can draw on some, things that have happened in the world, but I have to make sure my characters are nobody real.
This raises the questions what our processes are, and I'd love to hear from all of us describing how do you find a plot, how do you pick a case, how do you build a character, do you go by the seat of your pants as you write along without a plot, or do you scratch down every scene and outline very, very thoroughly before you even set word to screen?
Well,
I really try to plot because it's easier that way. I don't get lost. Unfortunately, what happened when I started writing my current series, The Eyes of Lore, I told you this was torturous. Originally, there was a shared universe of this planet, or whatever it was, because it was never nailed down, you see, as to exactly where and when we were. And so I wrote 2 stories set in this city, which had been given to me, but the actual details were sort of fuzzy and, we'll get to that, except they never did. So I had 2 stories, so I just had to make it all up. But by that time, I'd written the 2 stories and I had no idea where I was going, so I just went on and on and on. But I really don't like to work that way. I like to know where I'm going. And my other books, I always outlined. I will deviate from the outline, but the outline gives me a format. It gives me a framework. It tells me I'm going from here to there to there.
I would say I'm kind of a hybrid pantser and plotter, because I try to figure out where I'm getting my inspiration from. I might be getting an inspiration from a character who's got a certain psychological quirk or something like that, or even the setting where I want something dramatic to happen. And so I may experiment with writing a couple of scenes, and then I start trying to connect things. Then so I kind of write, and then I plot ahead, and then I write some more and I plot ahead. And pretty soon I start getting an idea of where it's ultimately going to go. And then I can kind of go back and pull the whole thing together. But I kind of have to have the emotional motivation, the interest in the character, the interest in the situation. Sometimes, again, an interest in a setting that I'm working on something now that I'm based on a big antiques mall that is loosely based on the Red Bank Antiques Mall, except the murder gets killed there, so I can't be, I couldn't put it there. But I was fascinated by it, and to give a little something away, I have been there pretty often with a friend who lives in Monmouth County, and the last time I went there, it was particularly for research. And I was always fascinated by the freight elevator. And I talked to somebody who worked there, and they said, "Oh, I'll give you a ride on the freight elevator." So this freight elevator goes back to the turn of the century. and it's like an Otis, and it works with a pulley, and it creaks and it groans and everything as it goes up and down. And after we finished our ride on the freight elevator, I'm walking away with my friend, and she said, "You got to put a body in there." I said, "Absolutely, I got to put a body in there. That's where the murder victim is going to be." But I have to key on to something that inspires me, and then the ideas start to flow. So I'm kind of a hybrid writer along that line.
Sounds like
Robyn?
something. Sounds like something I once did, where we were supposed to write short stories about a place in New Jersey. And I wrote one about a certain bend in the Passaic River.
Yeah.
And so did my friend.
Wow.
But hers was contemporary and mine was set in colonial New Jersey.
There you go. You bring yourself to it, you know.
I just like history.
Delia, I
Robyn?
guess I'm a bit of both. So when I did By Way of Sorrow, I had an agent, but I wasn't under contract with anybody. It was, I was just writing it for myself. And that one was pure fly by the seat of the pants. I had no outline. There were people in that book that I thought were going to live that died. There were people that I thought were going to die that lived. The ending didn't turn out to be the ending that I thought it was going to be. It truly was fly by the seat of the pants. And when we sold it, my agent sold it in December of 2018 to Kensington Books. And when I got the deal sheet, it was for a 2-book deal. And I said to my agent, Carrie, I only have 1 book. And she said, "You'll write a second." And so I discovered, however, that when you write a second, that before your editor and the publisher will take it, you do have to do an outline and you do have to send them 50 pages. So book 2, Survivor's Guilt, was outlined. I have a wonderful editor at Kensington, John Scamilio, who gives me a lot of freedom, because I found even when I outline something, I know Roberta said something like this, you find out that as you start to write it, what you thought was going to be, I can go from point A to point B to point C, you can't get to point C through point B. So you have to be willing to adapt and change it on the fly. And John is wonderful in that sense. So Survivor's Guilt was certainly not as much fly by the seat of the pants. And likewise, when they acquired book 3, I had to go through the same process of providing an outline and then working through that. But I do like the freedom even within the outline to change things as I go along, because I don't think that when I'm doing an outline, I'm imagining everything that could go on. And, I know authors, I've heard authors say it, and before I was, an author, I'd kind of go, really? But characters do kind of take on a life of their own. And
Yes.
Once they get going, you have to let them go where they're going to go. And if that's not in your outline, you still have to let them go. So,
yeah. Even to the
Good job
point
to you.
I found even to the point of characters solving mysteries that I wasn't quite sure what the solution was, but because of her skills and her insight, I said, "Oh yeah, that actually is the solution. If only I thought of it myself." But I too, I think all of us had described a sort of a hybrid process, and I too am one who I like to know the beginning and the end of the book. I tend to know what the climactic scene is. I certainly know who the murdered people are, and I tend to know that. I don't write a formal outline the way we learn to outline things in high school. But I do write scenes, and I'll write as many scenes as I can in the order that they proceed. I'm very sort of simple in the sense that things go from the beginning to the middle to the end, and I write the scenes out. And then I may play around, but I don't move around the scenes very much, partly because they're chronologically defined, and I can't put that scene 22 in front of scene 12 because it was 2 days earlier, so that I don't find myself doing that. I do find myself improvising or throwing in additional scenes. It's usually, I tend to be very, very lean in my writing. I tend to underwrite, and my editors even said, well, you know, this is very, very tight. You can add more. You can go more for the emotions of the scene, and put some of the more of the emotions in, more of that into the plot. I tend to write very lean, and so I'm often finding when I revise that my major revisions are expanding and amplifying the elements, sticking new scenes in to make so it's possible to go from A to C through B, B1, B2, B3, and B4.
We should work together because I tend to overwrite. So you could edit me down.
Yeah. Oh.
Part of the thing about writing in a universe that people are not familiar with, whether it is the past or the future, is you have to add an awful lot of description because you have to ground people. Delia and Robyn can use what I call shorthand. You can describe people by their possessions or by brand names or by place areas. You could say, so like I said, so-and-so lives on, works on Wall Street, and all of a sudden click. Or so-and-so came up through Newark. And people will be able to point them. I have to give a lot more in my imaginary city or in my city in the past.
Good point.
The
Now-
one thing that I've discovered that, and Roberta, I think you touched on it earlier, in terms of people will find your mistakes because I write legal thrillers. I have to make sure that I have it 100% accurate as to the law. And you know, again, because I'm a lawyer, I have a little bit of an advantage, but just like you said, people take a certain amount of joy in a nice way of saying, oh, wait a minute, you didn't get this right. And so I'm always, you know, you're hyper vigilant in terms of the world you create. I'm hyper vigilant in terms of making sure that I get all of the technical legal issues right.
Yeah. I always say that I do a lot more research than ever gets on the page.
Sure.
And I'm sure that you do too. I know that Eileen does, because she researches a whole lot of background on the cat things.
Well, I couldn't even begin my series until I figured out how a person, or whether a person could make a living grooming cats, because that was the premise that I was given. And first of all, the first thing that comes into your mind, most people's minds, and a few of my characters do say that, is, don't cats groom themselves, you know? And I thought, other than, you know, am I going to have her just be grooming show cats? Because those are the ones that are most intensively groomed. So I started to investigate it and research people who did this kind of work. And the person, the couple of people that I found out who did this also had boarding establishments. And that was a full-time job, you know? So I said, this is great. If she grooms cats and she boards cats, she can make a living at that, and she's got a niche. And the other things that I found out that were unusual was that, and I did not realize this, pet groomers, people who market themselves as pet groomers, often won't handle cats at all. They might handle ferrets, then, you know, in addition to dogs, you know, they might handle snakes and whatever. A lot of them don't want to handle cats because cats are too temperamental to groom. Therefore, people who train as pet groomers can train as dog groomers or cat groomers. So it's a specialty. And the same thing with boarding. In the past, I have boarded cats. In the old days when I was living with my parents, we would put cats into board at a kennel that also had dogs, and the cats would often come home like this, you know, and that's somewhat typical, that the cats are very uncomfortable being in such close proximity that they can smell the dogs and they can hear the dogs barking, because they never know where they're going to be attacked at any moment. So boarding cats is also a specialty. Now, I didn't know this when I started researching, but as soon as I put that together, I said, this is great because she actually has a specialty. She's filling a need, you know, and sometimes your research turns up things that you didn't expect. Now, I was
All of you,
curious.
oh, go ahead.
When you're at the stage where you're starting to polish, do any of you use beta readers, critique groups, anything similar to that?
You know I do.
I know
Yes.
you have.
Eileen is my beta reader.
I do a beta reader for her, but I also have been in critique groups, a couple of critique groups, and I'm in one now. And I was wondering if you find that helpful, or do you have do you have a spouse who goes over it and says, oh, this is, this needs work? Or
No, I definitely use beta readers for my novels, my series. I've also used a professional editor before it gets to a publisher, before it gets to the publication process. I use a professional editor. I have used authenticity readers, used to be called sensitivity readers. In one of my books, a key character is a trans boy, and I wanted to have a trans man read my story and make sure that I was getting as close to good, as close to right as I did. And his comments were extraordinarily helpful in redirecting some of the responses of the other characters, my main characters. And I find beta readers and authenticity readers excellent resources and boosters for my novels.
Yeah, I agree with Delia. I use beta readers. Fortunately, one of my children, my middle child, my son Colin, is also a published author. So we are each other's beta readers. And I do use I did use an authenticity reader for my first novel, By Way of Sorrow, because one of the main characters was a Black trans woman who was a sex worker. And I wanted to make sure, again, just like Delia said, you want to make sure they're authentic. And even though I'm a trans woman, I'm not a Black trans woman, and that experience is far different than mine. And so I wanted to be sensitive to that experience and make sure that I portrayed it accurately. And as Delia said, those, the people that help you like that are invaluable, because again, when we're writing a character, we want them to be real. We want them to be authentic. We want people to be able to say, wow, look at this. And so the people that like that, who help you, are invaluable. And also, like Delia, I do use a professional editor who, again, I find an invaluable resource.
Yes.
One thing I have is, because I'm writing science fiction, I have to get the technology right. So when I go to a science fiction convention, which is fairly frequently these days, there are a number of people in science fiction and fantasy writing who have specialties in certain types of technology, which are kind of esoteric. Medieval technology, historical technology. And so I will corner one of them and say, I want to do this, and this is how I want to do it. Is this possible? And they will usually give me an earful about why it is or isn't, and exactly how it could be done.
Yeah.
Which I may or may not use, but at least I know. And a lot of this is available online, but not necessarily where you can find it. So, especially,
and it may not be exactly the thing that you want to know. It may be something left or right of that. So you want somebody you can really explain it to.
Somebody who's tuned into your, like I said, my specialty. The thing is that the mystery itself and the people involved, because I don't do aliens, or paranormals, let's call them. I don't do fae, I don't do vampires. I did a werewolf once, but that was kind of weird. And you didn't know, it was sort of like hinted. but I do people in odd situations, I guess you'd have to call it. So the motivations are human. The technology may not be.
What was that, Delia?
I was going to ask, because all of us, I think, are writing or have written series. And when Robyn mentioned how she was startled when she was saddled, you could say, with a 2-book deal, and she had to actually be in a series, I wondered if, Eileen, maybe you could talk about how you thought about your series and what did you do to prepare for your first book so that it would lead into the subsequent books and make for a coherent series, or did you pants that too?
No, well, in my case, they were kind of looking to make it a series. I got a 3-book contract, and I only had an idea for 1 book to start with. But my way of approaching it, and it might be the classic cozy way, is I try to give my character a situation, a profession, and an environment where she's going to come into contact with a lot of people. And unlike some cozies, which are set in the most precious, lovely little small towns that you can ever imagine, I put her in like the general area of northwestern New Jersey. And I put her in a town that is a small town. It's becoming a bit touristy. It's getting more people moving out from the city who want, like, who are willing to commute or maybe want a second home and have a little bit of money, because those are the people who are going to be able to afford to get their cats groomed and things like that. But there's also wooded areas, there's mountainous areas, there's poorer people who have been out there, rural people who have been out there a longer time. And I wanted her to have both, I should say both upscale people, people who are kind of in the hard knocks, and people in between, so that there would be a variety of folks who would have a variety of motives. There could be a rich guy killed in the first book. There could be a poor person killed further on. The motives would be entirely different. The people that they were surrounded by were entirely different, because that way I figured I could just keep it going. I wouldn't be repeating myself, and I could have a variety of things going on. I hate to say this, and I might make enemies, but I'm kind of bored by cozies where everybody is a member of the family, or, there's always a personal motive. It's always because Aunt Sally has hated her neighbors since, I like dealing with a wide variety of people, maybe because I'm an only child and I didn't come from a big family and whatever, and I'm not nobody's going to be killed over how somebody does the pot roast. But I want to, yeah, well, I'm sure it's been done, but at least in a book. But I wanted to have a variety of people, so that if I wanted to deal with a certain situation, a certain theme or whatever, I would naturally have characters there who would represent that theme, represent that conflict. And that keeps it interesting for me. Then I can, once I've done something in the first book, I can try to do something entirely different in the next book with the same basic cast of characters.
I didn't think I was writing a series. I wrote my very first professionally published novel, The Problem of the Missing Miss, because somebody asked me to. It's, again, a long, involved story, but an editor from St. Martin's had edited some anthologies in which I had participated and thought I had I was a good writer, and asked me to write about Lewis Carroll. And I tried several ideas, and I thought I was writing a standalone. It turned out I was writing 4 of them. The same thing happened with Halvar. I had written a standalone, and the person who picked it up, which was a small press, Liz Burton, said, "Well, where's the next?" I didn't know I was going to write a series. I just did. So I didn't really plan them. The first three just sort of happened, and the second three I did plan a story arc, so to speak, over 3 novels. But again, I didn't really think I was writing a series. I just thought, okay, I'll just see where Halvar wants to go next.
Delia, what about
Robyn,
you?
how did, oh, me?
You go. Yeah, you go. I'll finish. You go. You go.
Okay. I knew when I wrote Lost and Found in Harlem that I wanted this to be a series. It came to me as a series. And again, as Roberta was saying, there was a long story arc, or actually, in my case, it was a character arc. And so I knew from the beginning, from probably the first 3 pages that I wrote, I wanted to build in certain features of the main character. His name is Rook. I wanted to build in certain features that I wouldn't have to or be able to explore thoroughly in book 1, but would be held in reserve for the future books. When we meet him in the first one, he's at the bottom of his dive into literally the gutters. He's living in in what is a sort of a leftover brothel, and he's one of the few people who pay their way not by turning tricks in that brothel, but there's a fire and he gets kicked out. So he literally is in the gutter until he meets up with the detective agency that takes him in, and then he finds a new job and a new career. But in the first few pages, as he's getting out of the fire, we learn that he's an Iraq war vet. We learn that he has an injury, injured leg that leaves him with a permanent disability. We learn that he doesn't like guns and doesn't use a gun and refuses to use a gun. We learn that he's divorced, and so on. So we don't know what his war experience was. We don't know who his ex-wife was or why she's out of the picture. We don't know why he's out of a job and literally in a gutter when we meet him. And and has literally no friends. These are the kinds of things that it wasn't until I want to say the 4th book, yes, in the series, that we meet his ex-wife. And she finally comes into play. This is long after he's solved many other cases and fallen in love with his boss. And so he's very much involved with the woman who's the boss of his boss in this agency. But his ex-wife reappears. And at least for me, it was a very satisfying moment. We've had references to the wife, but we didn't know what happened to her. Similarly, with the boss, the woman whom he meets very early on, who becomes his boss and then his lover, we know that her mother has disappeared and that this is a great wound in her life. The founder of their detective agency is her father. And so Rook works for the two, this father-daughter duo, and their great trauma is that the woman who disappeared. And we don't learn about that until book 4. We know it happened, but we don't know why. We don't know the backstory. So we know that Rook is alienated from his parents, but we don't know why. So these questions are not really cases, but they turn into cases, especially when the ex-wife is murdered in book 4. So then he definitely wants to solve that, but that's not until, as I say, until book 4. So I tried very consciously to think about mysteries of character as opposed to, or layered on top of case mysteries, case-based mysteries. And the cases are definitely round up, and each book is standalone. You don't have to read it you don't have to read any others. You can read one and be very happy and never read another one. I hope you don't, but you can stop and you've solved the case and you know who did the killing, and that person has been disposed of one way or another. But you won't know everything there is to know about Rook unless you read the next book. And that was sort of how I thought of these this pulling back of the onion, as you go along through the books.
Yeah, when I wrote By Way of Sorrow, obviously, I had published nothing at that point, so it was very much a standalone, and was very pleasantly surprised by the "you will write book 2." So, like you, Delia, my books are written as standalones, but there is, when I started to write book 2, first of all, my editor, John, gave me great advice. He goes, don't ever reveal anything that happened in book 1 because you want people to go back and read it. So you kind of have to retell the characters again to a new audience. So you're giving a lot of the same information. But when I started book 2, I guess at that point I was hoping that there would be at least a book 3 because I had a character, an arc for my main character, Erin, in terms of her family life and her personal life, not the cases that she'd come to, but where she would go in terms of being a character, in terms of her personal life as a transgender woman. And exploring the issues that surround that in terms of family, in terms of personal, intimate relationships and things like that. So I had that arc in mind when I started writing book 2. I kind of knew that, okay, this is where it's going to end with book 2. If I'm fortunate enough to get book 3, this is where that arc is going to go. And I have been fortunate that when they signed me to do book 3, they asked me for book 4. So now I'm working on book 4. And again, it's just the character arc, the personal story, and where they're going that continues to evolve. But as you said, they're standalones, they're new cases each time. And you could pick up book 3 and read it and know as much about Erin McCabe as if you had read all 3 of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Eileen, how are we doing for time?
We've got about 20 minutes left, and I was wondering if we have any questions.
Right.
Melissa?
So there hasn't been a lot that's come in, but we do have one question.
Terrific.
Do any of you have a protagonist that you had to drastically change across a series, or a character that just had to be killed off because they just weren't working for you?
That's a good one. Why do I think Delia or Robyn would want to deal with this?
Yeah, you don't kill off that many people, right? No, I've never killed off a protagonist because, or let's see, did I drastically change a protagonist? No. They do evolve. There's, human beings, we all hopefully evolve and progress and change over time. So my characters have, but no, I wouldn't say that I killed somebody off because I had to. It's just part of the story if somebody gets killed off.
Part of the thing is that my story arcs take place over a fairly short period of time. The Halvar books start at the fall equinox. The first 3 take place at the fall feria, which is roughly equivalent to September, October. And the second 3 take place over a 3-day period, which is the equivalent of what we would call the Christmas season. He calls it nativity, but it's basically Christmas. So there isn't much room for really deep character development there. He changes very subtly because of what happens, but it isn't really a major breakthrough, no. I have done one thing, though. In my first draft of the first Halvar book, Murders in Manatas, I killed off a character. And then I realized that this was the most fascinating character in the whole damn book, and I had to bring him back. And I changed the dead body. But that changed the whole story for the better, so it was just as well.
I will say that this is not quite the same thing, but I did take base a character on someone in real life who had annoyed the heck out of me while I was working for newspapers, and I wasn't sure whether to make her a victim or a murderer, and I kind of almost did both. I thought, I'm going to make this woman's really going to come off badly because she attempts to kill somebody and dies in the process. So she's like, but this was somebody, and I really think I was maybe a little too hard on her in retrospect, because she was almost like a female sort of Sheldon Cooper. She was the most annoying person to interview. I came there for a newspaper and I was trying to interview her, and she couldn't understand why I wanted to talk to her about her house. I mean, why would I want to talk to a homeowner about what she did in the house? But she, and she acted very impatient with the whole thing. But she kind of did this kind of Sheldon Cooper sort of thing of, well, this is my education and this is what I did, and these are all the things that I accomplished. And it wasn't exactly bragging; it was just like a recitation, But she did, and the way she treated the people who were working on the house was, kind of appalling. So I knew I was going to do something bad, but I thought maybe she would just be killed. But then in the end, I had her die trying to get rid of somebody else. So it really, blackened her reputation.
It was justice. It was justice.
Fortunately, the character doesn't look anything like the real character in real life, but the house was exactly the way she had it. And she will never read my book, and she will never recognize herself for the house. I know that.
Who's watching tonight, Eileen?
Yes, right. She'll know tonight. You got your revenge.
Well, that's a good way to do therapy and working it out in a different way, right?
Yeah. You definitely try to see if you can get, a little therapy in there, to take it out on some people who've gotten under your skin.
It makes sense. So now that we're running out of time, I want to make sure that each of you can tell everyone who's watching and who watches the recording and listens to this as a podcast, where they can find you online, follow you, anything that you have coming up soon.
Well, my website is www.ef, as in Francis, Watkins.com. And I have, my books are published by Kensington, and they are online in Amazon, and they are available in as trade paperbacks, as mass market paperbacks, some of them, and as audiobooks, and in Kindle. And I always like to plug the audiobooks, because the actress who does the vocals is absolutely fantastic. She really gets like the snotty characters. She gets the right tone, and she gets the angry scenes, and she's very good at it.
My books are published by Zumaya Publications. The Halvar alternate history books start with Murders in Manatas, and the detective out in outer space on the planet is, the first one is called Lore, Lorr, and Disorder. And the easiest way to get them is as ebooks. As I said, it's a small press, but they are available as ebooks via Amazon and Kobo and Nook and all the rest of them. Or you can go directly to the Zumaya Publications website. I have a Facebook presence. I have a Facebook authors page called Manatas Skyline. And I'm usually around at both mystery and science fiction conventions. And the next one I'm going to attend is called Shore Leave. It's in Maryland in July.
Me?
Yep.
I have, okay. I'm an indie author. That is that I have self-published 6 books. The most recent one of which is Murder Take 2. This is based my contemporary noir private eye mysteries based in Harlem that I've discussed here today. There's 6 of them, and you can find them easily on Amazon or bookshop.org. in trade paperback. I also am very pleased to note that I have a book coming out from Minotaur next summer, that is in summer 2024. The book is called Trouble in Queenstown. And no, you can't find Queenstown on a map of central New Jersey, but it is set in central New Jersey. Features a Black woman private investigator in a small New Jersey town who uncovers racial tensions, family disputes, and secrets. And as she is herself recovering from a huge personal loss, which has brought her back to central New Jersey. So that book is Trouble in Queenstown. It's coming out from Minotaur in it's summer of 2024. And yes, Robyn, they surprised me with a 2-book deal. So that there's a second one that I'm writing for that same series all of a sudden. You can find me on my website. It's www.deliapitts.com. And I'm also active on Twitter. My handle there is blacktop1950, and on Instagram, and I'm Delia Pitts 50 on Instagram. So follow me everywhere.
And you can find me at www.robyngigl.com. I'm on Twitter at Robyn Gigl and Instagram at Robyn Gigl. I am published by Kensington Books. My books are available anywhere books are sold. They're available in all formats. Hardcover, Remain Silent is just the 3, hardcover, audiobooks, and Kindle. The other 2 are available in trade paperback as well, or mass market paperback. I never know the difference. One of those paperback forms. This is what they look like. This is what they look like in paperback. And they're available wherever books are sold, Amazon, any independent bookstore. I always tell people, if you have a local bookshop and they don't have my books, please ask them to order it, because I love to support independent bookstores. And so if you have one that you like to frequent and they don't have my books, they can order them and they'll have them in a few days. So that's where you can find me.
And I think we're all going to be reading at the next meeting of Sisters in Crime Central Jersey, which is going to be an open mic.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking we're going to be doing the panelists again at some point too, but yeah, reading. Yeah, we're going to be reading excerpts of things that, well, any excerpts we want to, but generally things that are not already in publications. So.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining the East Brunswick Public Library and wanting to share your panel with us in the writing community. Mystery, as you explained, is such a diverse genre, and some people think it might not be. So hopefully you maybe inspired people to read in a new direction that maybe mystery isn't what they had thought it was. And also for sharing your writing process, because even though you're talking about specific things, I think there are universal writing things that people can really gain from this. So thank you all so much. Thank you to anyone who will be watching the recording. We will re-upload of this. We'll also share it on our podcast. But for East Brunswick Public Library and all of these lovely authors in the Sister in Crime Central Jersey, thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.